My husband tried to betray and financially ruin me, but I saw through the lies and outmaneuvered him. What started as suspicion turned into a full-blown legal battle. I didn't just survive, I fought back, exposed the truth, and reclaimed my power. This is my story. My victory. This is the tale of how my husband believed he could outsmart me. My name is Sienna. I had never heard of the name Len Amaro, and it began with murmurs in the dark and bank transactions I never performed. My husband Damien had no intention of simply abandoning me. He intended to steal everything. However, he misjudged me. He believed that I would break. I took the initiative instead. What was mine, I guarded, and his whole scheme failed a week later. The length of time he had been preparing it, the number of falsehoods he had spoken, and the extent he was prepared to go to in order to ruin me, however, were all worse than the betrayal alone. The bed was empty when I woke up. I could tell Damien had been gone for some time by the cool sheets next to me. I initially assumed he might have gotten a glass of water or gone to the restroom. However, I heard his voice, low, hushed, cautious, as I sat up and wiped the sleep from my eyes. A sliver of moonlight came in through the window, creating shadows on the floor, but the hallway light was out. As I followed the sound, my gut wrenched. Just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything yet. I halted in the middle of my step. My breath caught. Damien's voice was soothing and soft, as if he were soothing someone. My ribs were hammered by my heart. To whom in hell was he speaking? I strained to hear more as I stood there, but the words that came next were muted. He lowered his voice to hardly more than a whisper. I balled my fingers into fists. This was no late-night business call. During business calls, Damien never muttered. Hell, he didn't even mind if I heard what he was saying before. Every possibility that crossed my mind was worse than the one before it. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps coming closer. He came around the corner just as I was about to dash back to the bedroom. I slid under the blankets, pretending to sleep, my pulse pounding. I felt the dip in the bed a moment later. Beside me, his weight moved, but I continued to breathe steadily. A couple of minutes went by. Then he let out a slow, relaxing breath, as if nothing had occurred. I rolled over and gave him a quick blink. Where did you go? I sounded drowsy and soft, like if I had just woken up. Without hesitation, he said, bathroom. A falsehood. And the call. Damien hardly batted an eye. Just a customer. For a case, various things had to be clarified. I kept my eyes on him, waiting for any hesitancy. He looked at me, unreadable as usual. Perhaps I was thinking too much. Perhaps it was work. That whisper, though. That phrase. Still, she has no suspicions. I pushed myself to roll over after swallowing the lump in my throat. Even though my intellect was screaming at me, I chose to ignore it. Not this evening. Not quite yet. I got up earlier than Declan the following morning. His arm was stretched across the cushion where my head should have been, and he was still sound sleeping. Grabbing my phone, I snuck out of bed and walked barefoot to the kitchen. Normally, I didn't look at our financial accounts. The majority of the money was handled by Damien, and I had never really thought about it. However, something didn't feel right. My stomach nodded as I scanned through the transactions. $500, $1,200, $750, $2,000. In the last 3 months, there have been 12 withdrawals. Despite their relative smallness, they are all common enough to cause concern. While Damien and I had separate accounts for personal expenditures, we shared expenses such as groceries, utilities, and the mortgage. These were not bill transactions. They weren't for financial gain. Furthermore, they had nothing to do with anything we had talked about. My hands clenched around my phone as I took a trembling breath. I heard footsteps behind me. After swiftly locking the screen, I turned to find Damien scratching his neck while leaning against the doorway. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice heavy with slumber. "For breakfast, what?" I put my phone down. I was going to pose the same question to you. Grinning, he moved ahead to pour himself a cup of coffee. "Well, guess it's your turn now." His free hand was lying on the counter as I watched him take a sip. This morning, I looked into our bank account. Damien stopped, only for a fraction of a second. Just enough time. He squeezed the mug tighter, then he stifled a laugh. With my arms crossed, I remarked, "There are a lot of small withdrawals. I don't recognize things." He hardly hesitated. Just modest financial outlays. A couple of business prospects. Business prospects. Damien put down his cup and nodded. There is no need for concern. For short-term profits only. He was telling lies. I was aware. I simply had no idea why. I tried to get rid of the uneasiness for the remainder of the day. Damien wasn't helping, though. He was in the next room, answering calls while riveted to his phone. When he placed his screen on the table, it was always facing down, and it seemed like a wall separated us each time I looked at him, one that was previously absent. My mind wouldn't stop racing that night as I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Damien had always been self-assured. Easy, a man who could talk his way out of any situation. But I knew when something wasn't right since I'd been with him long enough. And there was undoubtedly a problem. I looked over at him. His face was peaceful, his breathing regular, and he was already asleep, like a guy with nothing to conceal. I didn't believe it. The words I had been attempting to ignore all day were uttered by a voice in my head. Is something truly wrong, or am I just being paranoid? Even as the early light came in through my window, the doubt persisted. I had slept through the whole night, unable to get rid of the uneasy feeling that something was seriously off. I could still hear Damien's tone from the previous evening, casual, contemptuous, yet calculating. This is the tone one uses while concealing something from view. I dragged myself from bed and started my morning ritual. However, my motions felt robotic. I couldn't stop thinking about every conversation I had had and every warning sign I had disregarded in the previous few months. Then, as if nothing had changed, Damien walked into the kitchen. "Good morning, sweetie," he whispered, kissing my temple. I was thinking that, just in case of emergencies, we should probably organize our finances. My fingers clenched around my coffee mug as I froze. "Our finances?" I carefully echoed. "Yes," he replied, leaning against the counter and drinking his coffee as if it were any other conversation. "For example, do you have a complete list of all of your assets, passwords, and accounts? Everything should be kept in one location." My heart pounded in my ears as I gazed at him. Damien had never, ever been interested in my private money. We did have a joint account for expenses, but we never combined our personal savings. It was simply the manner in which we had always operated. I forced a bland expression as I swallowed. "I mean, I suppose I could assemble something." His eyes flickered for a moment, but his lips curled into a tiny smile. He gave a nonchalant nod, then casually shifted the topic. However, my thoughts were already racing. This had nothing to do with us or just in case of emergencies. Damien was getting ready for something, and he didn't want me to see it coming, whatever it was. Damien was unusually laid back that evening. He proposed ordering takeout, laughed at the TV, and browsed through his phone as if nothing was wrong. He was doing a great job as a devoted husband. What made my skin crawl was that he had changed in some way, both in his speech and his gait. It was too simple, too practiced. Then it took place. Damien left his phone on the coffee table and went up to take a shower. His phone was never left unattended. Never. My heartbeat accelerated as I gazed at it. As it had been for weeks, the screen was facing down. Then a notification appeared on the screen, as though the world was giving me a lifeline. An S from Lena Morrow, a name I was unfamiliar with. I had no time to reflect. With trembling hands, I grabbed the phone and slightly angled the screen to read the preview of the message. "Just make sure she doesn't know." Nearly there. My breath caught. It ached how quickly my chest clenched. Suddenly, I felt as though the walls were closing in on me, and the room was getting smaller. Lena Marrow, who the hell was she? And by almost there, what did they mean? For only a fraction of a second, My finger lingered over the screen, allowing my most outrageous ideas to briefly cross my head. Was this a different female? Did Damien intend to abandon me? Was he concealing funds? The water stopped, and I heard it. I put the phone back precisely where it had been and collapsed into the couch, clutching my knees to keep my hands from quivering as panic struck. After a minute, Damien walked back into the room while drying his hair with a towel. I made myself turn to face him. He was quite composed, so comfortable, I had no idea that I had just witnessed something that I shouldn't have. Have you made a dinner decision? He ruffled his hair and inquired. I took a deep breath. Not just yet. Without a second look, he reached for his phone and unlocked it with ease. Without hesitation, as if there was absolutely nothing to be concerned about. But now I knew better. I tried to make sense of what I had witnessed for the remainder of the night. Perhaps that wasn't what I had assumed. Elia might have been a coworker, a business associate. Perhaps keeping me in the dark had a totally different meaning. Something harmless. But I knew better in my heart. One by one, the parts were coming together. The confidentiality, the funds are vanishing. The call came through in the dead of night. The unusual interest he showed in my financial situation, that's when I should have challenged him. I needed evidence, though, if I was correct, and Damien was indeed concealing something so significant. Actual evidence. So I didn't say anything. Instead, I gave him a goodnight kiss. As if nothing were wrong, let him slide under the covers. Then, while clutching my phone, I laid there muttering into the darkness. Lena Marrow, who the hell is she? The question was still bothering me the following morning, eating away at every idea I had. I went through the motions of my regimen as if I were a ghost. But Lena Marrow was the only thing on my mind. The name kept coming back to me like a puzzle piece that didn't fit but wouldn't go away. At breakfast, Damien sat across from me, calmly browsing through his phone. I questioned whether he knew I had seen that message. He was a really talented actor if he did. However, he looked up and grinned, as though he could sense my doubt. Hey, sweetie, are you able to sign something quickly? My coffee almost choked me. What do you sign? I asked in a light tone of voice. Just a few financial updates. To comply with tax laws, he stated, passing a document across the table. Despite his informal tone, there was a tell in the way his fingers tapped against the table. My stomach churned as I picked up the papers and quickly read the first page. The document was loaded with legalese. However, it became painfully obvious that taxes had nothing to do with this. I turned to the final page. Agreement for the transfer of property. My ears throbbed with my heartbeat. My resources. The condo, too. His name would be added to everything. I made myself glance up. Damien had a cautious smile on his face as he observed me. Damien, I said in a tone that was too composed and in control, what is this? He continued to smile. Baby, it's simply a precaution, a convenience for the law. Between us, nothing changes. I tightened my hold on the page as I gazed at him. Is nothing changing? You want me to give you my signature on everything? Not everything, he responded with ease, as though that improved the situation. Just bringing everything together. For defense, in case something happens. You know, my hands shook a little. Not out of fear, out of anger. This was no longer paranoid. I wasn't reading too much into this. This was prearranged. He even dared to sit across from me and pretend it didn't matter. Slowly and deliberately, I put the document back on the table. Then I looked into his eyes. I refused to sign this. His grin wavered. For a split second, his jaw tightened, and then he laughed briefly. Don't be theatrical, Sienna. It is merely documentation. I didn't back down. So why do you want me to sign it without even reading it? His face grew stern. Sienna, you truly don't want to do this. His voice was controlled and quiet as he leaned slightly closer. However, beneath it was something. Caution. A danger. Unflinching, I looked him in the eye. Is that dangerous? Damien took a while to respond. Rather, he folded his arms and sat back in his chair. His face changed into something that was almost impossible to read. A disquieting calm took the place of the sneer that had been there only a second before. He spoke carefully and continued, "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be." He spoke too smoothly, too measured. I suppressed my rage and maintained a neutral look. He continued to believe he was in charge. I was still seen as only another move on his meticulously constructed chessboard. As I watched him, I allowed the silence to grow. The idle tapping of his fingers on the table. His mouth twitched slightly when I didn't answer. He was awaiting my response. To get sentimental, to become alarmed, to shatter. He wouldn't get the satisfaction from me. So I grinned, just enough to cause him to move, just a little, uncomfortably. "What do you know, Damien?" I replied softly as I got up and gathered the documents. "You're correct. I really must give this some thought." He squinted his eyes. That was unexpected. However, I had already walked to the kitchen, put the papers on the counter, and turned away. I had no intention of arguing. Not right now. Not quite yet. Because I had taken charge now. Damien pretended nothing had happened that evening. As if he hadn't just tried to deceive me into signing away everything I owned, he strolled around our house, making himself a drink, watching the news, and browsing through his phone. However, as I observed him, a conclusion weighed heavily on my chest. Our marriage had never been in danger of being saved. He had no intention of making things better. He was preparing to leave. And when he went, he wanted to take everything with him. I discovered him in the living room the following morning, drinking his coffee as if he had no worries at all. However, he looked up instantly when I sat across from him, sensing a change. He put down his cup and said, "We need to talk." I cocked my head. "Oh." He let out a sigh, as though this were hard for him. Like he was having trouble. "I believe we ought to part ways." It was there. He spoke as if he were giving a prepared speech, with each syllable precisely timed. "It's not working anymore," he added in a level voice. "You must observe that." I just stared at him. He wasn't requesting a divorce. He informed me that it was taking place. I waited a beat, then another. At last I said something. "Have you not been planning this?" Something flickered across his face, then vanished before I could identify it. "Sienna, it's for the best. We've become more distant. Separated." Was it what he was using? I rested my arms on the table and leaned forward. "You're saying you want to leave." He pulled his lips into a thin line, but he wanted to make sure he didn't depart empty-handed. He did not, however, dispute it. I might have let out a scream. I could have tossed whatever was closest across the room. However, I didn't, because I now had a steel resolve inside of me that wasn't there before. So, I tilted my head slightly and leaned back in my chair. Then, with as much composure as possible, I uttered the words that would alter everything. "My assets have already been moved." Damien's whole body tensed up. I could feel his breath catch, but not enough for anyone else to notice. "What are you saying?" His tone was too acerbic, too regulated. I grinned. "Slow. Intentional. That's exactly how it sounds." He tightened his jaw. The moment he understood he had lost, I witnessed it. He had been planning this for months, arranging every little thing to make sure he won. However, he had misjudged me. He detested that. We were silent for a long time. At last, Damien let out a quick breath and got to his feet. He picked up his coffee, sipped it slowly, and then turned to face me with a look that made my blood freeze. He smiled again, but it was a chilly smile. Calculated. "Sienna, you're going to regret this." I couldn't tell if it was a desperate bluff or a threat. In any case, I was prepared. His hand had been played by Damien. It was my time now. As I went about my routine, the morning air felt thicker than normal. The coffee had an unpleasant flavor, and like a warning, the apartment's silence weighed down on me. I vowed not to let his remarks from the previous evening affect me. The tap on the door, however, was abrupt, deliberate, and formal. After putting my coffee down, I inhaled deeply before opening it. On the opposite side was a man with a huge envelope in his hands, wearing a navy jacket. Sienna Walker, he inquired. I gave a nod. His face was expressionless as he held out the envelope. You've received service. As I watched him leave, I clenched my fingers around the papers. The envelope felt more substantial than it ought to have. I knew what it was without having to open it. Nevertheless, I made myself sit at the kitchen table, letting out a short breath before removing the papers and slipping my finger under the flap. A request to dissolve a marriage. The financial demands caught my attention as I quickly scrolled down the page. Damien wasn't simply walking away. He desired half of everything: the apartment, the vehicle, half of our common resources. Additionally, because he was so bold, spousal support. I shook my head and laughed bitterly. Naturally, he believed he could handle anything. For months, he had been preparing this, most likely longer. My husband was a frigid man. However, this was a premeditated move. I sat across from my lawyer, and the air smelled like newly printed paperwork and polished wood. As she reached the financial breakdown, she scanned through the documents, smirking softly. She tapped her fingernails on the desk and remarked, "Well, Hyun has nothing." I furrowed my brow. Just like that. She looked up, laughing. Just like that. Before he filed, you transferred everything into a trust. Legally speaking, he is therefore unable to obtain. She went on to say, he can fight for spousal support, but given your income history in comparison to his, it's not happening. My shoulders finally relaxed from the tension I had been carrying since that knock on my door. As I exhaled slowly, I felt like I had real control for the first time in weeks. For all this time, Damien believed he was the one planning the game. He'd underestimated me. I was pouring myself a glass of wine that night when the front door crashed open. I didn't flinch at all. Damien stood there, waves of rage washing over him. His jaw was clenched so tightly that I thought I could hear his teeth grinding, and his tie was unfastened. Don't you think you're really intelligent? His tone was piercing, poisonous. I sipped my wine slowly, enjoying the way his rage swirled about him like a tempest. I believe I'm at last taking care of myself. At his sides, his hands clenched into fists. This was something you planned. I tilted my head and put down my drink. So did you. A heavy veil of unspoken accusations hung between us. At last, he let out a harsh sigh, his eyes darkening as he whispered, "This is not the end of it." I also let out a slow, steady exhale. The first battle was mine, but the conflict was only getting started. I was somewhat relieved that Damien was no longer controlling my finances for the first time in weeks. However, I should have seen that he would not go in silence. At work, the first indication of problems appeared. It began with looks, long, lingering stares rather than the typical fleeting glances, and then whispers that ended as soon as I walked into the room. Rachel, my assistant, was hesitant to enter my office by mid-morning. "Hey, you ought to know something, don't you?" Already tired, I looked up from my laptop. "What is it?" She made an uncomfortable change. "There is a rumor circulating." I was going to remain silent, but she wrung her hands and walked away. "Just let me know." Rachel paused once more before letting out a sigh. "They claim that you embezzled funds from your joint accounts, that you were," she swallowed hard, "money laundering." I gazed at her. The remarks struck like a blow to the head. "What?" "I don't think so," she hurriedly added. "However, Damien has been speaking with others. Attorneys. Buddies in common. The word is getting out." Anger rose in my chest like wildfire as my stomach twisted. Damien had more in mind than simply stealing my money. He was attempting to destroy me. I was struggling to keep my composure by the time I arrived at my lawyer's office. This must end. Right now. My hands quivering with anger, I slammed the stack of printed screenshots onto the desk. Rachel Quinn gave them a quick look and laughed dryly. "All right. He is undoubtedly desperate. He is disparaging me." "Indeed. However, we may make use of that. She tapped her pen against the surface while leaning back in her chair. He exposes himself to defamation charges if he is circulating incorrect information. First, we submit a cease and desist. We escalate if he disregards it. I tighten my jaw. I don't want the legal proceedings to continue on. All I want is for him to quit. Rachel Quinn let out a sigh. Sienna, he's attempting to lure you. He wants an emotional response from you. She's correct. Bella was standing near the door with her arms folded and her eyes unwavering as I turned around. You can't let him tell you what to do next, she murmured, taking a step forward. He wins because you react too quickly. I nodded rigidly, swallowing my rage. But I was fuming within. Did Damien want to fight? He was going to receive one. I discovered him laughing over cocktails with two coworkers at La Rue, one of the most upscale restaurants in the city. My blood boiled when I saw him sitting there, utterly unconcerned, as if he hadn't spent the last few days dragging my name through the mud. I didn't create any commotion. I refrained from screaming. I didn't have to. I just approached the table, bent over, and muttered, "You don't realize what you've just begun." For a brief moment, Damien's grin wavered, just long enough. Then he covered it up with a casual smile, wiped his lips with a handkerchief, and looked at me with challenge-filled eyes. Well, let's see what you have. I had warned him once more. I was done being fair now. Damien had been attempting to control, threaten, and manipulate me for weeks. I had always been underestimated by him. Now, after disparaging my name and failing to collect my money, he was shooting one last time. A man who is desperate is dangerous. My phone rang in the middle of my morning coffee. Rachel Quinn. Before Rachel Quinn had uttered a word, I sensed the urgency and answered the phone. Without introducing himself, my lawyer stated, "You must come in." A motion for a complete financial audit was just filed by Damien. My body jolted sharply at the words. I cautiously put down my coffee and took a big breath. For what reason? Rachel Quinn let out a breath. He says you handled joint funds improperly, that you must pay him a compensation. It's total bullshit, but that's not the idea. Naturally, it wasn't. I whispered, he's trying to drain me. Legal charges, time, stress. He tries to wear me down because he knows he can't win. Exactly. My chest twisted with a stinging bitterness. Damien never played for a win. He played till his opponent was exhausted. Not now. I hung up after saying, "I'll be there in an hour." When I entered Rachel Quinn's office, Damien's motions were already written in red and strewn around her desk. She looked up and remarked, "This is the good news. He has not a single piece of credible evidence." What's the bad news? Weeks could yet pass during this, months perhaps, if his strategies are accepted by the court. I balled my fists up. What should we do next? She declared, "We counterfile and ask for an immediate dismissal. If the court determines that this is a stall tactic, we also demand that he pay all legal costs." I grinned. Let's get it done. I ended up sitting across from Damien in a courtroom 2 weeks later. He was well-dressed. His necktie was a bit tight. His smile was hardly disguised. This, he believed, was his time. First to stand was his attorney. "My client has grounds to suspect that Mrs. Keller mishandled assets in order to evade a just divorce settlement, Your Honor. We are asking for a thorough forensic examination of every financial transaction that has taken place throughout the last 6 months." I didn't respond. I didn't wince. Rachel Quinn, serene as ever, rose up and adjusted her glasses. "Your Honor, before Mr. Keller even filed for divorce, my client made all of his financial decisions. There is no proof of fraud or poor management." She pushed forward a heavy binder. "Furthermore, as this is an obvious attempt at financial harassment, we ask that this motion be denied with prejudice and that Mr. Keller be held accountable for paying all legal costs." The judge looked over the paperwork slowly. Their face was unreadable. There was tension in the room. Quiet. Damien was observing me, awaiting my wriggling. He didn't get the satisfaction from me. The judge looked up at last. The court determines there is no justification for a thorough financial audit. The motion is turned down. Additionally, Mr. Keller will be liable for all legal costs related to this claim because there is insufficient evidence. The gavel clapped sharply. Damien had lost in an instant. Once more, he walked silently past me outside the courthouse. However, he mumbled as he went by, loud enough for me to hear. "You believe this is finished?" Simply wait. This time, I had prevailed. However, I was aware that Damien had one more move to make. He is the kind of man who doesn't leave gently. They refuse to concede. They get back together. They take a nap. They plan. And they have something worse when they return. It didn't take me long to figure out his last move. The following morning, there was a call. With a tense voice, Rachel Quinn remarked, "Sienna, we have a problem." I tightened my hold on the phone. "Now what?" A pause occurred. The shuffling sound of papers. "A formal complaint has been lodged by Damien and Elia. You are being accused of financial fraud." I gasped. "They have proof," she added, "that you have been fabricating financial records for months." The air escaped my lungs. If this charge persisted, I wouldn't merely lose cash. There might be real legal repercussions for me. "They turned in documents," Rachel Quinn added in a tense tone. "You will be compelled to participate in a criminal investigation if the court finds this to be serious." The earth swayed a little. I forced myself to remain composed as I pushed my fingertips against my temple. "Are the documents authentic?" On the other end, a sneer. "Definitely not. However, they are good. They were altered by someone." They had, of course. Ilya. Damien's every action is guided by the invisible hand. "But before I called you, I had Bella look at them," Rachel Quinn continued. "She also discovered something." I felt a glimmer of optimism in my chest. "What?" "She was able to identify the bank transfer's timestamps. One important point was overlooked by the person who created them. Those accounts weren't even in existence at the time the purported transactions occurred." I ejected a sharp breath. That was it. The error that would destroy them was that something sharper took the place of the burning fear. Did Damien want war? All right, I was going to stop it. I had already decided by the time I got to Rachel Quinn's office. Not all I was going to do was defend myself. I intended to bury them. I laid my palms flat on the desk and declared, "I want to go on the offensive." Not only to get my name cleared, I wished to eliminate them. After examining me for a while, Rachel Quinn nodded. "All right, since we have enough to complete it." She indicated a folder. A forensic financial analyst was contacted. What Bella discovered was validated by them. The records were altered. She gave a strong, contented smile. "Therefore, we submit a motion demonstrating that the documents are bogus. We then bring a defamation and evidence fabrication lawsuit against Damien and Ilya." I gave a nod, "and I demand complete damages." Rachel Quinn, obviously satisfied, reclined back. "I assumed you would say that." I went to court with Damien 2 weeks later, for the final time. As Rachel Quinn presented our argument, I kept a close eye on him. Her voice sliced through the room like a dagger as she spoke precisely. "These were fake documents that were used as evidence against my client," she claimed. "We have unquestionable evidence that the listed financial transactions never took place." During his testimony, the forensic analyst described each changed number and fictitious timestamp. Damien's attorneys wriggled. They were aware of their defeat. Then the last blow was delivered. A fresh folder was set down on the judge's desk by Rachel Quinn. "Your Honor, my client is countersuing Mr. Keller and his associate Lena Morrow for defamation and the submission of false legal evidence in light of these false allegations." It was deafeningly quiet in the courtroom. Damien's attorney turned to face him and said something urgent in a whisper. Damien's face was white and his jaw was frozen. At last, his attorney got up and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client would like to revoke his claims." He did, of course. There was nothing he could do. The magistrate gave a nod. Motion was discarded. Additionally, all legal fees will be borne by Mr. Keller. Damien was defeated. Totally. Damien went silently by me as we left the courthouse. I didn't stop him. I didn't have to. After allowing him to walk a few paces, I whispered, loud enough for him to hear, "Are we finished here?" I felt something I had nearly forgotten for the first time in months. Calm. No more hearings in court. No more dangers. No more worrying about what Damien would do next, and waking up in the middle of the night. I was victorious. It didn't seem like a significant triumph. Not in the way I was hoping for. A spectacular conclusion. Firework. The last words flew like munitions. However, none existed. Nothing but quiet. The kind that follows a storm when the thunder has stopped, but the sky is still thick. Additionally, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that silence. Rachel Quinn and I had our final meeting 2 days later. A last stack of papers was slid across her desk. "It is finished." The settlement was signed by Damien. With a slow exhale, I hovered my fingers over the documents before picking them up. Even though I already knew the result, I skimmed the details. Damien received nothing. Not a single penny. His claims about money were rejected. His lawsuit for defamation backfired. His reputation was shattered. He had attempted to ruin me, and he was the one who ended up with nothing. Rachel Quinn watched me while leaning back in her chair. "How are you feeling?" I laughed quietly, more like an exhale than a sound. "Lighter." She grinned. "All right. You are worthy of that." I put the papers in my bag and nodded. It was the final phase. I stood and extended my hand. "Thank you, Rachel Quinn, for everything." She gave it a firm shake. "Sienna, go enjoy your life. You deserve it." And I believed her for the first time in a long time. Bella and my mother demanded a victory dinner that night. When I entered Helen's house, her eyes were filled with relief, and she gave me a heartfelt embrace. "It's done," she muttered. "Yes," I whispered. "It is." Grinning mischievously, Bella poured champagne and held out her glass. "To liberty, and to never again allow a man to believe he can outsmart you." I laughed as I clinked my glass against hers. "I'll have a drink to that." We had some food. We conversed. We looked back, and I wasn't always watching over my shoulder for the first time in months. The next hit wasn't what I was waiting for. The conflict was over. I stood on my balcony later that evening and looked out over the skyline of Chicago. The city lights glistened, reaching far into the distance. It all felt different. The lady who had disregarded the warning signs was no longer me. She was no longer the woman who had trusted in the false promise of security and stability. I had misplaced items. Have faith. Time. The kind of love I believed I had. However, I had gained more power, clarity, command. On the table next to me, my phone began to vibrate. Unknown figure. I didn't think twice. Block. I returned to my laptop where a blank document was launched. A fresh chapter. A fresh tale. My tale. I muttered as I shut down the laptop. Now this is my story. Let me leave you with a thought to ponder before we conclude. We are often put to the test in unexpected ways by life. The folks who betray us the most are sometimes the ones we trust the most. However, this is what I've discovered. Avoiding betrayal is not what strength is all about. What matters is how you bounce back from it. I could have allowed it to shatter me when I was on the brink of my marriage. I could have allowed uncertainty and fear to take over, but I decided to fight instead. Not just for my money, but also for my honor, my liberty, my future. And if you only remember one thing from this tale, it's this. You underestimate your strength. If betrayal ever caught you off guard, if you've ever had the feeling that something was taken away from you, recognize this. You're not by yourself. Even if life may throw you some curveballs, it's in those times that you find your true self. And occasionally, letting go of things that no longer serve you is the biggest triumph of all. I'd like to hear from you now. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a circumstance where the odds were stacked against you? Leave a comment with your ideas. I read each and every one. Tell me where you're watching from, or leave a one in the comments if this story spoke to you. Of course, you should hit the notification bell and subscribe to the channel if you would like to hear more stories like this one. Much more is ahead. Until then, keep going strong. Remain astute, and don't ever allow somebody to take away your authority. And if I've learned anything, it's that the finest form of retaliation isn't anger, but rather rising. It involves reconstructing a life that is so solid and rooted that nothing and no one can ever topple it. Silence is sometimes the loudest response. Therefore, keep your peace if you're recovering from betrayal. Establish limits. Expand. Let go gracefully. I would be delighted to hear from you now. Have you ever been betrayed and overcome it? Leave a comment with your tale. Healing begins when we are not alone, so let's make room for one another. What did your storm teach you?